This story takes place around 1998. I live in the town of North Glen, Colorado. At the time I was 9 years old and it was still pretty underdeveloped. There, the school buses weren't allowed to go down the street that I lived on because of specific zoning. So the school bus would let us off at the start of a couple of blocks away from where the complex started. So to give you a better picture, I would get off the bus, and to the left of me was a big building that used to be a tech company of some sort. I can't remember which company it was, but they had closed down, so the parking lot was always empty. To the right of me was a big field, and about a block away from the tech company was the beginning of my apartment. I would walk through this parking lot daily after I got off the bus to go home. Often I got out of school before my sister did, because she was in middle school and I was in elementary. This was a time obviously before we had cell phones. These were the good old days, with landlines. I had felt relatively safe and previously had never had anything to worry about. But one day I got off the school bus and I was walking to my complex. There were a few other children that were talking and walking together, and I was kind of the loner, and I didn't really have any friends in the comics, so I often walked by myself. I had noticed that there was a truck parked in the parking lot. There was also a guy sitting in this truck. I didn't really think anything of it, and just continued walking home. Well, about a week or so of seeing this truck, I began to notice the man that was inside the truck was looking at me every time I walked past him to go home. He never parked close enough to where I was going for me to really be concerned, though I started to notice after some time that he was starting to park close to where I would walk, so I started walking partially in the field to head home. He never got out of his truck, but just watched me. I didn't think there was anything to alert my mom about, because, well, like I said, he had never gotten out of his truck. He was just sitting there. It was around April, about 2 months after this man was seen in the parking lot watching me, that things had changed. I got off the school bus as usual, and I started my trip home. This time, the man was not only parked in the parking lot, but he was standing outside his truck. I walked partially in the field, like I'd started doing, and I stopped dead in my tracks when I then noticed that he was then motioning for me to come over to him. Mind you, for a 9-year-old kid, I was pretty small. I looked a lot younger than 9. I could have easily passed for being 5 or 6. I just stood there, staring at him, as he was then motioning for me to come over to him. I was wondering why a grown-up would want to talk to a child. My mom always taught me not to talk to strangers or ever approach strange vehicles. I didn't see any of the other children that got off the school bus with me, and assumed they had already made it home. When he realized I wasn't going to come to him, he started walking towards me. Pretty much out of nowhere, another kid from my school came up to me, noticing that this guy was really weird, and coming towards me, then saying, "There you are, I was waiting for you." He and I just walked the rest of the way to the apartment complex together, before then parting ways. Thinking back on it, I think that he had a plan to kidnap me, and if it weren't for that kid, I would have gotten kidnapped for sure, and I probably would have never been seen again after that. After the incident with the truck, I never saw it again. I don't know who this kid was, but I'm so thankful that he noticed something was wrong and came over to me, like he did. I did talk to my mom about this years later, and she truly believes that if it weren't for that kid, she would have never seen me again. We're both very thankful for him. Be safe out there, everyone. Before I start this story, I should say that I'm a young girl that lives along a highway. I had driven to a nearby town to meet my mom and dad for something, leaving my 2 younger siblings at home. Once we had finished our business in town, I left to go home. My parents stayed in the town. I'm a fairly new driver, so my mom wanted to guide me through the busy intersections before she turned back around. The moment she had turned off the road, a white stereotypical kidnapper van had pulled behind me. The van was nearly bumper to bumper with me, and it followed me for about 30 minutes. But you never think that someone is about to kidnap you. So not wanting to overreact, I told myself that the van likely was just coincidentally going the same way. Stupid, I know. I had my suspicions, but it was mostly me just joking around with myself about the busted up van being a kidnapper van. Eventually, I get to my house and turn off the highway while looking into my rearview mirror to see if he had kept going. I had truly expected him to keep going, so when he turned into my driveway, behind me, my blood ran cold. I immediately called my mother in a blind panic. Instead of pulling up to the concrete slab beside my house, I had parked on the gravel in my yard, where my dad parks his work truck, which was thankfully gone, since he was driving it. The man parked behind me and got out of his vehicle. My mom was panicking and demanding what I do not get out of the vehicle. The man started gesturing at me to quiet and get out of my car. While walking closer, he was a white man with greasy brown hair. He was very skinny and his eyes had glazed look of someone who wasn't high, but had a history with drugs. I eventually hit my gas and pulled around my yard, back towards the road, only to see him following me in the rearview mirror. I had turned left onto the highway, and he turned right, flying down the road away from my home. My dad then called me and told me to go somewhere public and check my vehicle. I did, but nothing was wrong with it. The part that scares me the most is if my father's vehicle had been in its usual spot, I wouldn't have been able to get out. I would have parked the house, which would have left me trapped, which I later learned the door was locked, so I had tried to run from my house only to be locked out with a creepy man in a dingy van. The pure dread I felt when he turned behind me into the driveway will never leave me for as long as I live. I still cannot believe that happened. When I was an 8th grader in middle school, I had a best friend at the time, and she would always hang out with me at my house. Well, on Halloween she came over. I was supposed to watch scary movies and eat snacks, but she suggested we do a little trick-or-treating around the neighborhood. I agreed. We went by, after we decided to go to one more neighborhood on top of a small hill by my house. It was less than a mile away, so I texted my mom saying we were walking to the neighborhood on top, and then we'll be back right after. She agreed, so we went at the 4th house. People were outside. It was a nice family. My friend and I decided after this house we'll go to 2 more and then start heading home. Most people weren't home, so 4 houses down from the families, a black car pulls up beside me and my friend. It's a man, and he's asking us for directions. My friend and I just look at each other, both of us having this scared look. Excuse me, I say, to which the man repeats, I need directions somewhere, to which my friend then says, I'm sorry, sir, but we can't help you. And the man then says back, get in. Now my friend and I back up quickly from the sidewalk, and she takes my hand, running the opposite way of his car, towards the family's house. They were going inside when we got there. I then said, there's a man in the black car telling us to get in with him, but we don't know him. The lady stands in front of us, guarding us, and her husband runs after the car, but he got away. They told us they would report the incident and if our parents could come get us, they would go talk to them about getting the police involved. But instead of my family being worried and scared, they were actually mad at me, and they told me to tell the lady to not call the cops, and they were fine. I do, and she says, okay, while giving us a hug. Her husband ended up dropping us off in my house again, and I remember just going to the bathroom with my friend and crying on her shoulders while she hugged me. A few weeks later, I was walking home from school alone, and right as I got into my neighborhood, I saw a black car turn in, and he pulls up beside me and says, hey sweetheart, you want some candy? It's the same man from Halloween. I'm just shook at this point, standing there thinking this is really going to happen again. Then he says, come here baby, you want me to give some head? Instantly I felt disgusted, and my flight kicked in, so I ran home telling my mom. I forgot what she said specifically, but in conclusion, my family basically said that I just needed to be more careful and watch my surroundings, like it was my fault. Last year I ended up getting close to my Native American youth advisor, and I told her what happened that Halloween, and she actually reported it. I haven't seen this guy since, but now I'm a junior in high school, and whenever I think back to that time, I feel nothing but anger. So the guy who tried to kidnap me twice, you better hope I don't see your perverted nasty ass again. So around a year ago, my friend who I'll call Ruth and I had been out looking at houses that we liked the look of, as we had planned to live together and we wanted to get a feel of what the areas felt like late at night. So I'm from a small town, while she had been living in the city attending uni, around an hour's drive away. For context, it was around 2 a.m. As we were driving along the main road that led to the entrance to town, we realized a yellow car full of men had been following us for quite a while. We didn't think much of it at first, but naturally it really creeped us out. So she sped up, but so did the yellow car. By this point we were low-key beginning to panic as we didn't want to take them straight to my front door. So once we reached the entrance to my town, we tried taking random turns just in case it was just paranoia, and also to see if they would just give up and leave us alone. Well, they didn't. By this point we'd been driving around for a good 30 minutes and we were quickly losing fuel, and the plan was to fill up at the gas station as we entered, but as we were being followed, neither of us felt safe getting out of the car. To do so, we felt we had no choice but to head back towards my house and call my dad, and in hysterics to come walk us up to the front door, as neither of us felt like it was a good idea for her to have to fill up her car and drive home alone. Ruth never gives up. The hill leading up to my house is very steep, but on that day we had no choice, as if we entered the car park, we would have been trapped by that yellow car. We still had no clue what their intentions were, but luckily once they saw my dad, they drove off realistically. We should have just called the police, but in our minds we were really afraid of what they might think of us, as we were two young girls driving around in the early hours of the morning. Luckily, I haven't seen that car since, but it still makes me worried to this day what their intentions were. Was it just a little fun trying to scare some young girls, or were their intentions much more sinister? That is a question I'll never have the answer to. I really hope you guys enjoyed those stories. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, stay depraved.